kind of in the background inspiring me gently, but now I'm here speaking to you about it. I really feel privileged and honored. Thank you very much. Well, my presentation today is going to be about what made him the Mahatma. Like most of us today, I only read about him in history books. And even as a child, he made me feel awed at how he was this one simple, ordinary man, like you and I, can corral thousands of people without holding a position of any authority whatsoever. And what he did, he changed the world. And we are talking about him today. So as I prepared for this presentation, it still made me feel that same awe. And my heart opened and marveled at this wonderful man. He truly, to me, is a Mahatma. The word Mahatma means a great soul. On this slide, you're going to see, you're seeing a few words there written by him, I'm assuming. He says, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Peace is the only way. If everyone believed that, or even a few people believe that, especially the leaders who are running the world, perhaps we won't be in the state we are in as a planet. During my presentation, I hope to talk mainly about Gandhi's nature and qualities. It's not going to be a history lesson. What I'm hoping to do is inspire you to go do some homework, if you haven't already, about what he did and how he did it, more importantly. And perhaps read his book, My Experiments with Truth. As I started to prepare for this presentation, thought I'd fix that. I wanted to put down all of the qualities that makes up a Mahatma in my mind. And look at, there is, whoa. I don't know, I think you can hear me, right? I don't really need the mic. My voice carries. Okay. So as I put all these words up on the page, and I came up with 2 more slides, so don't you worry. I thought, wow, look at all those words. These are they his qualities? You probably would think of more. And then I came up with 2 sayings of my guru, who has taught me everything I know, Sai Baba. He says, love all, serve all, help ever, hurt never. And I think Gandhi lived every moment of his life through those 2 sayings. Wouldn't you say? I'm so happy to be in the presence, and I'm actually humbled to be in the presence of people like Tanya and Mr. Coutier, is that it? I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. And others, Kishan, who's writing these wonderful essays, who are also going towards loving all, serving all, helping ever, hurting never. And you know what? I came up with more words. Some are repetitions because I just wanted to put them there because it sounded great. Like courage, being fearless, you know? Most importantly, Gandhi showed the world through his own suffering and struggle, selfless service. which is what is amazing. Self-reliance. He knew how to make his own sandals and clothes, for example. Gandhi lived the unity of thought, word, and deed, which sprang from his learnings from Bhagavad Gita, and we'll talk about that later. He was completely open and transparent in everything he did. He believed in the unity of all religions, although he loved Bhagavad Gita. We'll see that as well later. He fought tirelessly for Hindu-Muslim unity until the very last breath. He wanted one human family. We are all one human family. That's what he wanted. Yes, he did that. But most of all, he put God first, others next, himself very last. That was Gandhi. Was he a Mahatma? Does that describe a Mahatma, do you think? Perhaps you'll come up with more words to describe a Mahatma. But we have those qualities, don't we? We have truth and love and sometimes peace, sometimes courage, sometimes fearlessness, and all that. Are we Mahatmas? What differentiates Gandhi from us? It is, I think, in my opinion, the consistency of practice, which we lack. You know, our minds flipping, monkey mind, going from here to there everywhere. It makes it very hard for us to be consistent. So, we may be mini Mahatmas. We got a long way to go to reach him. Two of his very visible tenets were the truth and non-violence, which he stood for. So what I'm going to do is kind of bring in little anecdotes from his life over this presentation, just as little examples here and there, to describe how he lived truth. Truth was his life, his very breath. At all costs, he was standing up for truth. He didn't care to be intimidated, even if he was intimidated and pressured by peers. He stuck to truth. One example was when he was a young boy, even at school. A school inspector, British school inspector, because it was the British India then, British were ruling India. British school inspector came to his school to inspect and gave the students spelling test. Does anyone know this story? Yes? Okay, good. If you do, that's great. Wonderful. All right. He gave a spelling test, and the teacher, who's obviously being evaluated over here, was walking around, noticed, and he was using one of those black slates, right? That's what they wrote on in a little chalk piece, I think. He noticed that Mahatma, or Mohandas, his name, before he became the Mahatma, when he was a little boy, his name was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Mohandas had made a mistake. And the teacher, sneaking, surreptitiously, motioned him to copy the correct answer from the student sitting next to him. Gandhi, repeatedly he tried that, the teacher. Gandhi refused to take the hint. How many ever times he was asked? He handed in his answers the way it was, how he had done it. And later, he was scolded, chided for his stupidity. You know, for a young man like Gandhi, young little boy at the time, to stand up to your teacher, intimidating, but he did. That was him. For him, truth always prevailed. And that's what the quote says, and hopefully you had a chance to read it. Even as he fought for truth as a young child, when he grew up, he fought for the poor and downtrodden. And he created the word called Satyagraha. And we will talk more about Satyagraha in later slides. But what it means is upholding the truth through non-violent civil resistance, which is what he did. Non-violence was one of his tenets that also stands out. When we think about Gandhi, we think about non-violence. And we heard that before from the speakers in this hall today. As he taught people non-violence, he wasn't just saying, be non-violent. Like, how do you do that? Go and fight for your rights, but be non-violent. They're going to beat you, but don't do anything. How do you do that? What he did was he gave them guidelines. He made rules. He said, yeah, you've got to be non-violent. You have to exert self-control. You have to be patient, tolerant, and build endurance. He urged them to not retaliate, even in the face of hardship and violence against themselves. So some of his rules were, I quote, "It is probable that I would be arrested. Even if this happened, they are to people, his followers, they are to march on until arrested themselves. Though every effort would be made to provide them with meals, they shouldn't mind if some days they don't get any food. For the duration of the struggle, they must abstain from drinking alcohol. They must not retreat even in the face of death. They should expect no shelter during the march, but sleep on the grass. No trees or plants on the way should be harmed in any way, or anyone's belonging even touched." Cared about the environment. If the police comes to arrest them, they just must surrender willingly. At all costs, he insisted they must avoid resorting to violence. Because, he said, the violence, though it looks a temporary win, it leaves a permanent mark. The evil that remains will never go away. Because an eye for an eye for an eye for an eye makes everybody blind. That's how he taught the world. And he practiced the truth and non-violence through love. I believe he was a personification of love. He had the amazing quality to turn the hearts and minds of even his scariest, daunting oppressors. One incident comes to my mind. It is in South Africa, in the time of when Black Act was passed. At the time, the president was General Smuts. General Smuts went back on his word to Gandhi and threw all his followers and himself, Gandhi himself, in jail and persecuted him. Because, first of all, the Black Act, what it is every South African Indian must be fingerprinted and registered and must carry on them their registration papers at all times. That was the rule that the Black Act passed. The South African Indians obviously protested with Gandhi's leadership. Gandhi corralled them and said, "This is discrimination. We have to fight. The way that they did this non-violently, through the rules that we read before, they organized mass strikes, protests. The miners went on strike. They picketed the documentation offices. They just stopped working or doing anything. They traveled illegally between provinces. Can you imagine, to go within the same country, you couldn't go from one place to another without permission, I suppose. Gandhi fought with all of his South African Indian followers through non-violent means. Although they were beaten, thrown in prison, faced so much hardship, no food, no water, they fought. 7 years later, finally, the Black Act was repealed. So Gandhi proved that non-violence works in the end. General Smuts, who was the president during that time, who had gone back on his words to Gandhi, you know what Gandhi did? When he was in prison, he loved, by the way, he loved being in prison because it gave him time for self-inquiry, prayer, meditation, and study, spiritual study. But what he did was he made some sandals with hands, handmade sandals. He packaged them, sent them as a gift to General Smuts. And 25 years later, the general recalls this. He says, I have worn these sandals for many a summer since then, even though I may feel that I am not worthy to stand in the shoes of so great a man. This is an example of how Gandhi, through his love, turned one of his persecutors around. He had complete faith in humanity. He said, just because there's a few drops of dirt in the ocean of humanity doesn't make all of us bad. He proved that there is a way to hate the sin, nevertheless love the sinner, which I know we all probably find difficult to do, even when it comes to our own children, sometimes. I said we will speak about Satyagraha because it was a foundation of his work. I want to take a few minutes talking about it. Gandhi called his overall method of non-violent civil action Satyagraha. Satya in Sanskrit means the truth. Graha, agraha, means firmness of force. So therefore, Satyagraha meant truth force or love force, truth and love are attributes of our soul. This then became the foundation of Gandhi's work forever, all his life. Because he believed we need to be strong, not with the strength of the brute, but with the strength of the God within, with the spark of God that's within us. That's what he was teaching. But the practice of Satyagraha required immense self-control, not just from himself, but he was asking this self-control from thousands of people. Look at that saying, Gandhi's words. The opponent must be weaned like a child. We wean our children from bad habits through patience and sympathy. That proves his hate the sin, love the sinner attitude that he always had. You know, as he was educating the masses on the principles of Satyagraha and teaching them how to be non-violent, even if they were persecuted, he said, the first condition of freedom is freedom from fear itself. When we fear, we know from experience, it completely causes inability for us to think, to move, to do anything. So freedom from fear is the first freedom. You know, I didn't talk about all the words that we had put up on this few slides ago, but you're seeing how the discipline, the patience, all of the 25 words that I put up there are coming out in these little anecdotes, his sayings, and his life. We talked a little bit about Bhagavad Gita. He loved Bhagavad Gita. If he had to make a complex decision, he would go and refer to it. For those of you who don't know what Bhagavad Gita is, it is equivalent to the Holy Bible for all the Hindus. And he would go refer to it, to the Gita, to find an answer. And when he was convinced that the problem that he's solving is good all around for the humanity, people at large, then he would go implement. That's what he did. Although he loved Bhagavad Gita, he believed in the unity of all religions. He believed that all religions are pathways to one goal, self-realization, to know who you are. That's what he believed. And I mentioned to you, he welcomed his time in jail because he had the time to study the Bhagavad Gita and do self-inquiry, do prayer and meditation. We must talk about leadership. I hear from my nephew, he's 18 years old, that this quote is in every textbook in India. I didn't know that until he just told me yesterday. Leadership was not something Gandhi sought. He didn't go out to have a big title or a position. But he was a unique leader. He was a natural leader to me. How could a simple person otherwise corral hundreds and thousands of people to take on hardships for themselves, for a cause? But when he put up his hands and called for volunteers, hundreds came. And he deployed them to do selfless service. He sent them to teach the poor basic sanitary hygiene. He sent them to run schools in poor villages where there were no schools. They just came. He just had to ask. But even as he taught the people to fight for their rights, he taught them they must fulfill their obligations. He was so balanced in his thinking. Even in India at the time, when caste, creed, race was huge, you would have heard about untouchables. It was very prominent at that time. In that India, he was able to bring people together of all walks of life, race, ethnicity, caste, creed, and to work shoulder to shoulder, to fight shoulder to shoulder for one cause. What he did, he had this innate ability to rouse people's enthusiasm and yet keep their passions in check so that they don't break into violence. Can you imagine that? That is the very, very thin balance there. Most of all, he was a leader who worked for the people, never for himself. To me, he's the ultimate servant leader. This quote I will read for you. Whenever you are... I spoke too long. I don't even have it on my paper. Well, pretty much what it says what it says is, if you're in doubt, if you yourself start to become big in your mind, when the self becomes huge, you stop. You think about the poorest and the weakest man or woman that you saw. Is it plugged in? I have a few more, but that's okay. I'm taking this one. So that slide kind of says that you think about the poorest and the weakest man or woman that you have encountered. And step back and think about, is the step that you're going to take just now, the decision that you're going to make, is that going to help that poor person? Is that going to make that person become in control of their own life and destiny? Then you go ahead and do the work, because your whole self will completely melt away. And that is the way to make a decision on what action to take. Pretty much that's kind of what that slide says. His legacy, I did want you to see this, but his legacy is best described by Einstein. Here we are today, 63 years later, talking about what he stood for. And working, you all here, working, being an example yourself, because his legacy is what Einstein says there is for generations to come. You would not, I can't repeat it because it's very flowery in the way that I can, I think of it. So he says, for generations to come, you would not believe that such a man walked in flesh and blood on this earth. But you know what? When he started out, he was an ordinary man. I wish I could see that to you. That quote will do much more than what I just said. But this is the gist of what Einstein said about him. We know that Gandhi's example of satyagraha was followed by Nelson Mandela. I'm almost done. Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, and you know that. They made a difference. They stood up for discrimination. And Nelson Mandela kicked apartheid out of South Africa, finally, after I don't know how many decades. Uncle Tiara would know. This last few days, last month, was full of violence. January of 1948. Violence between Hindus and Muslims broke out everywhere. People feared for Gandhi's safety because there were bombs. There was a recent bomb incident. But Gandhi did not want police protection. He cared not to live except by the power of love. On 30th of January 1948, he was rushing to the prayer hall because it was customary for him to begin with prayers, all his talks every evening, to a whole congregation of people. And he had this prayers in many different religions and languages. He embraced all religions during his talks. He was 10 minutes late. He loved punctuality, so he was rushing. There was this young man who came along and tried to take his blessings. In the pretext of taking his blessings, touching his feet, that's how they take blessings in India. He shot Gandhi 3 times at a very close range. Gandhi fell, uttering the words, "Hey Ram, hey Ram," calling out to God. Even in the last second, his words were nothing but in prayer. The Shaw, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru had to give the news to the people of India and the world. This is what he said with a heavy heart and a trembling voice. I quote, "The light has gone out of our lives. There is darkness everywhere, and I do not quite know what to tell you or how to say it. Our beloved leader, Bapu, as we call him, the father of our nation, is no more. The light has gone out," I said, "and yet I was wrong. For the light has shone in this country was no ordinary light. The light that has illumined this country for these many years, and the world will see it, and it will give solace to innumerable hearts. For that light represented the living truth, and the eternal man was with us, with his eternal truth, reminding us of the right path, drawing us from error, taking this ancient country into freedom." Those were Nehru's words. Gandhi was everything. Those qualities that we put up earlier on the presentation. Wouldn't you say? Everything those qualities said. He lived those words. He is the immortal Mahatma, an eternal great soul. Today, at his memorial, we began with "Be the change you wish to see in this world," which is, we all know this quote. How do you and I do that? There are many of you here doing that, and I'm humbled being in your presence. But we need to do more, because our earth, no time before in the past than now, it is needed for us to join hands together to help our Mother Earth and the people of the whole world. And I'm reminded, with all of you who are doing Make a Difference, I'm reminded of a few people, Canadians, who have started a lot of things we do. One is Craig Kielberger. Have you heard of him? Craig, even as a young teenager, he's freeing the children from slavery. Then we have, these are Canadians. You know David Suzuki. Romeo Dallaire, have you heard of him? He was the general in Rwanda during genocide. He made a difference. Ryan Heljak, very young boy, age of 7 or something. He started to build wells, raise funds to build wells in Africa because people didn't have water, and it touched his heart. This little young heart. Stephen Lewis, have you heard of him? He works for AIDS in South Africa, sorry. There's a new person that I just heard about a month ago. His name is Stephen McVie. At the age of 6, he learned about homeless children. He's an autistic child in Adri, right here in Alberta. He is working to end homeless children. He says, "I will not stop until there are no more homeless children." That's what he says. So if little things can be done by little people, we can do little things ourselves. This is how we can be the change we wish to be. One of the sayings of my dear Guru, he says, change begins with you and me. He says, when there is beauty in the character, there is harmony in the home. When there is harmony in the home, there is order in the nation. When there is order in the nation, there is peace in the world. So peace begins with you